want to argue that in this matter, we are acting today, by considering this today, too early, without consideration of our full range of options, and with too much uncertainty before us. The allegations that have been made in the indictment are fresh and new, only a week old. This council has the ability to take no action. It has the ability to censure. It has the ability to disapprove. It has the ability to suspend. And we have not spent time deliberating the full range of those options. We also are doing this in the middle of quite a bit of uncertainty about what the ramifications of a suspension would be. So if this seat is made vacant through a suspension, a number of different things can happen. 250,000 people, 250,000 plus people in the 10th district could be left disenfranchised without representation for a period of time. We could appoint someone to fill that vacancy, which is a limited form of disenfranchisement, but a form of disenfranchisement nonetheless, because it overturns the results of the last election. Or, depending on when we make an appointment, it could set up and mandate a special election to fill the seat. Now, if we choose that, and we're not committing to either path today, but all this is uncertainty before us, if we choose that path, colleagues, and we put us on the path of a special election, what happens if the charges are dropped? What happens if Mr. Ridley-Thomas is exonerated? We then now have two duly elected representatives of the 10th district. And then we need to wind up litigating this in court, the city equivalent of a constitutional crisis. There's much I can argue about the merits of this, and I will if we decide to hear this today and discuss this, about the rush to judgment on this matter. I do think it is important, though, for us not to consider this without having had the opportunity to hear more of the defense against these charges. An indictment is an indictment, and it has been said a good prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. All an indictment is a group of people have gathered in a room and have heard allegations and have not heard a single word of defense. And if we hear this item today, that's what we're doing today. We're essentially becoming a grand jury, hearing one side of the matter and not any defense. And that, colleagues, I would argue, would be a political conviction, a conviction without evidence and without defense and without due process. So I would ask that we have a no vote on hearing this matter today and have it go back to committee where it can be given some more deliberation and thoughtful process by all of us. Thank you.
There's a lot of discussion that says because there was an indictment, and at one point in history when there was another indictment, this indictment is equal to that indictment. And that's what a machine does. That's what an app on my phone does. It takes a data point and says this data point is equal to that data point. And so you ought to behave exactly the same way as you did on the previous data point. Well, that's what machines do. That's not what human beings do. That's the difference, the qualitative difference between human beings and machines. Human beings have the ability to look at every situation and make a judgment and ask questions. I was on this council and I voted to suspend somebody who was indicted that, frankly, I would have voted to suspend them before the indictment, because there were facts in that case that were qualitatively different than anything in this case. There's no money hidden in walls and trips to Vegas and prostitution and gambling across on the other side of the earth. Nothing close to that in this case. And so I resent this idea that you compare one indictment to another. In point of fact, most of the facts that we know today that were in the indictment were there 2 years ago. In between the time those facts were released to the public, Mr. Ridley-Thomas stood for election. Most of the people, including the maker of the motion, the seconder of the motion, the chair of the budget committee, me, and most of us endorsed him, knowing what was there. The only thing that's changed is we now have an indictment from a group of people who we don't know who they are, we don't know the information they were given, and we know for a fact that, like this morning, it was done in a way where Mr. Ridley-Thomas couldn't offer even the slightest defense. And so that, to me, is unsettling, it is unseemly, and it is unnecessary. Mr. Ridley-Thomas offered a motion to, I think, help deal with the situation. This motion effectively ignores that and says we're going to take an action, and we're going to hold the discussion on that action at a time when we know, because we read the paper and we know that the arraignment is in 90 minutes, so we can't be here to answer a single question or to put up a single defense. Lastly, I would say, as Mr. Bonin said earlier, I've never seen a case where a prosecutor seeks a grand jury indictment and doesn't get it. So effectively what we're saying is we believe the prosecutor, without even hearing from our colleague that we've had the benefit to watch for 30 years. If you didn't get to see him up close, you can read about it. And the benefit to the city of doing that is unclear and unarticulated. And I cannot support it. Lastly, I'll say this. For the folks in my part of town, after they saw the letter, even Mr. Ridley-Thomas's opponents, of which he has plenty, believe me, plenty spirited opponents, said, he's done the letter, he stepped back, there's no need to do anything else. And so from where they're standing, and frankly where I stand, all our vote does today is make sure a 67-year-old man doesn't have health care and doesn't have income during the toughest fight of his life. And so I encourage all of you to enthusiastically vote no on this, as I will be doing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ironically, I think I'm one of the few members of the body who did not endorse Mr. Ridley-Thomas for this seat. And I rise to vote no on this matter today. Let me say one thing to preface everything. The allegations in this indictment are serious and they're egregious. And if they are proven to be true, Mr. Ridley-Thomas, the accused, should be punished, and he absolutely should be removed from office. Those allegations have not been proven true. The ink is barely dry on those allegations. And I want to say something about Mr. Ridley-Thomas, and I want to say something about the residents of the 10th District. I thought Mr. Harris-Dawson spoke rather eloquently about the differences between this issue and the suspension issue for another member of this body who had been indicted. Having read this indictment, having known Mr. Ridley-Thomas for 30 years, I think it is important to give him the benefit of the doubt and the opportunity to defend himself before we rush to judgment and before we take such a severe and punitive action without any evidence and without any defense. Hubert Humphrey said that the moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. Throughout his career, whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him, and I've been on both sides, throughout his career, that is who Mr. Ridley-Thomas has stood for. There are people in Los Angeles today, because of him, who have a hospital to tend to their wounds. There are people in Los Angeles today, because of this work, who have a place off the streets to call home. There are people in Los Angeles today who have access to mental health care they would not have had before. Because of Mr. Ridley-Thomas and the work he has done, there are people who can enjoy their civil rights who would not have had that opportunity. And there are children in Los Angeles County who can feel the embrace of love rather than the lash of neglect or abuse or jail because of the work he has done on foster care and youth incarceration. If these allegations are true, none of the things I just listed would excuse that behavior. But for me, that 30-year career certainly justifies giving Mr. Ridley-Thomas the benefit of the doubt, hearing his defense, and letting this be adjudicated before we rush to judgment and conduct what really is a political conviction. And I want to say a word about his constituents. They just had an election in the 10th District. Mr. Ridley-Thomas sent a letter the other day offering to step back from many of his duties that he and many of us thought would be disruptive to our process, but still gave him the opportunity to advocate for the people that he is sworn to serve, people who duly elected him after a long campaign, a primary and a runoff. And by taking this action today, we disenfranchise them totally. Whether we appoint someone at some point or do an election, right now we are disenfranchising people. We are disenfranchising people today. And you know what? We're going to be redrawing district lines in a couple months, matter of weeks. We're going to be, we don't even know who we're going to be disenfranchising yet, because the people who in the 10th district will no doubt be somewhat different than the people who are in the district today. And I would just say, at a time when we are seeing nefarious efforts across the country, in Florida, in Texas, in Georgia, in state after state, to disenfranchise people, it gives me a knot in my stomach to think that we would do the same thing to 200,000 plus people in the city of Los Angeles. At a time when we are facing some of the biggest crises of our times, they will not have a voice in that. They will not even have a voice to say, please help me fix my pothole. And I just think it's wrong by the voters of the 10th District. It's wrong by Mr. Ridley-Thomas. And I think it's wrong by justice. Thank you.
First of all, I just associate myself with the comments made by my colleagues, Mr. Bonin and Mr. Marqueece, Harris-Dawson. Colleagues, let me say just for the record, no one is above the law. No one is above the law. But everyone ought to be treated equally under the law. Just as importantly, I think we have to pause and not rush to judgment, as my colleagues have eloquently stated. Councilman Ridley-Thomas has a right to due process, and that should take place in a court of law, not in the council chambers. After all, the law states that one is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And I choose to operate from a position of fairness, respect, and decency. And I, too, refuse to slaughter the reputation of someone who's got a 40-year track record of dedicated public service and working hard and serving those who are least able to service themselves. So I can't in good faith support an action that undermines the hard efforts of my colleague as a civil rights activist, as a state senator, state legislator, or as a supervisor. During a critical time when our city faces insurmountable challenges, homelessness, reimagining public safety, housing, we can't take a stance just based on allegations. It's just not fair. Unlike former council colleagues who became entangled in federal corruption cases, the charges against Councilman Ridley-Thomas don't even stem from his service here as a council person. Since this news broke, my office has been inundated with messages of support from all around South LA, as reflected and commented by my colleague, Marqueece Harris-Dawson. Even the enemies of Ridley-Thomas are saying that he needed to be treated fairly, really get his opportunity to express his point of view and for the facts to come out. And so I stand in solidarity with my colleagues, with the constituents, with individuals who are concerned, and I'm not going to abandon him at this point. The book of Matthew reminds us, judge not that you be not judged. For if the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So, Madam President, colleagues, again, I urge a no vote on this motion. Thank you.